September 16th, 1944, Western France. A single gunshot echoes across the Loire River Valley. An American soldier fires his M1 Garand into the air. Then another, and another. 20,000 German soldiers freeze in their tracks. They're marching toward American lines, hands raised, weapons abandoned. This is the largest German surrender to U.S. forces in Western Europe. And the decision General George Patton makes in the next few hours will determine whether thousands more Germans choose surrender or death in the months ahead. Because right now, standing at the front of this massive column, is a German general named Botho Henning Elster. And he's about to test whether the most aggressive American commander in the war has any mercy for defeated enemies. Most people think Patton was just a bloodthirsty warrior who wanted to kill every German he could find. They're wrong. What happened with General Elster reveals a side of Patton that changed the entire Western Front. A calculated decision that saved more lives than a dozen tank battles. This is the story of why protecting one German general mattered more than destroying him. Let's rewind 2 weeks. Early September 1944. The situation for German forces in France is catastrophic. After the Allied breakout from Normandy in August, Patton's Third Army is racing across France at speeds that shock even his own commanders. 70 miles in 1 day, 100 miles in 3 days. German defensive lines aren't just collapsing, they're evaporating. Supply routes cut, communication networks destroyed. Entire Wehrmacht divisions bypassed and isolated as American armor drives deeper into French territory every single hour. In Paris, Germans are surrendering by the thousands. In Belgium, German generals are burning their maps and destroying their codebooks. And in Western France, near the Loire River, approximately 20,000 German troops are realizing they're about to die for absolutely nothing. These aren't elite SS divisions. They're not hardened combat veterans. They're occupation forces, garrison units, supply personnel, mechanics, cooks, clerks. Men who were sent to France to hold territory, not to fight mobile warfare against American Sherman tanks, supported by P-47 Thunderbolts that own the sky. And now they're completely trapped. The Loire River is at their backs. Patton's tanks control every bridge, every crossing point, every road east. French resistance fighters are hunting isolated German units in the forests. Allied aircraft are bombing anything that moves during daylight. Trying to escape is suicide. Trying to fight is suicide. Trying to hide is just slower suicide. The commander of this doomed force is General Botho Henning Elster, 53 years old, professional soldier, career Wehrmacht officer. Not a Nazi fanatic, not a war criminal, just a man who followed orders and now faces an impossible choice. Because in September 1944, surrender isn't simple for a German officer. Adolf Hitler has made capitulation equivalent to treason. Officers who surrender without fighting to the last man face execution if they fall back into German hands. Their families can be punished, their property confiscated, their names dishonored forever. The official policy is clear: victory or death, nothing in between. But Elster is looking at the math. 20,000 men under his command. Zero strategic value in continuing to fight. Zero chance of victory. Zero chance of escape. If he orders his troops to fight, maybe they kill a few hundred Americans before being annihilated. Maybe. More likely, they just die quickly under American artillery and airstrikes. If he orders them to scatter into the countryside, they'll be hunted down one by French partisans who remember 4 years of German occupation and want revenge. Either way, 20,000 German soldiers are going to die. For nothing. Accomplishing nothing. Changing nothing about the outcome of the war. Elster is a professional. He understands military reality. This isn't about politics. This isn't about Nazi ideology. This is pure mathematics. His force has zero combat power, zero mobility, zero support. The only rational decision is surrender. But can he make that decision without condemning himself and his men to something worse than death? Here's what makes this moment insane. Elster doesn't just want to surrender. He wants to negotiate the terms. This is September 1944. Germany is losing the war. The Allies are advancing on all fronts. Elster commands a surrounded, cut off, defeated force with no leverage whatsoever. And he's demanding conditions. He wants guarantees that his men will be treated according to the Geneva Conventions. He wants assurances that the surrender will be conducted with military formality and honor. He wants promises that his soldiers won't be handed over to French forces, who have every reason to execute German occupation troops on sight. He's asking the Americans to treat him and his 20,000 men as honorable enemies, not war criminals. Most commanders would laugh at this. You're defeated. You're surrounded. You have zero bargaining power. You surrender unconditionally or you die. That's war. But Elster's request reaches officers in Patton's Third Army, and it lands on George Patton's desk. And this is where everything changes. Patton's staff is divided. Some officers argue they should demand unconditional surrender with no conditions. Why negotiate with a beaten enemy? Why give them anything? Just tell them to lay down their weapons or get destroyed. Show them who won. Make them understand what defeat means. But other officers see opportunity. 20,000 German soldiers removing themselves from the war without firing a shot. That's not a problem. That's a gift. Every German who surrenders is one who doesn't have to be killed. Every unit that capitulates is territory that doesn't need to be fought over. Time saved. Resources saved. American lives saved. Patton listens to both sides. Then he makes his decision. And it's the decision that reveals who George Patton really is, beneath the pearl-handled revolvers and the profanity and the aggressive reputation. He approves the surrender. He orders his subordinates to handle it according to the laws of war. Treat the German soldiers as prisoners of war, entitled to protection under international conventions. No special favors, no degrading treatment, just proper professional handling of a legitimate military surrender. Some of his officers are shocked. This is Patton, the man who slapped soldiers for cowardice, the commander who wanted to drive tanks all the way to Berlin. And he's showing respect to defeated Germans? But Patton understands something his critics don't. Something most people still don't understand today. How you treat surrendering enemies determines whether other enemies choose to surrender. Right now, across France, there are dozens of isolated German units in situations similar to Elster's. Cut off, surrounded, defeated. Every one of those units is watching what happens here. If Elster and his men get massacred or humiliated, those other German units will fight to the death. They'll have no reason to surrender, because surrender means destruction anyway. But if Elster and his men get treated according to military law, those other units will have a rational choice. Fight and die for nothing, or surrender and survive. This is strategic thinking, operating on a level most commanders never consider. Patton isn't being merciful. He's being smart. Every German who surrenders because they saw Elster treated properly is one fewer German an American soldier has to kill. The cumulative effect across France could save thousands of American lives in the coming months. And it costs Patton nothing, except following the rules that already exist. September 16th arrives. Nearly 20,000 German troops march toward American lines in formation. They're not a defeated mob. They're organized military units, moving with discipline and order. At the front, General Elster and his staff officers. Behind them, companies and battalions of German soldiers who've chosen survival over pointless death. U.S. Army units under Patton's 3rd Army Command are waiting. The surrender happens exactly as negotiated. Military protocol. Professional conduct. Elster formally announces the capitulation of his command. American officers accept the surrender without drama or theatrics. The German troops are disarmed systematically, organized into groups, processed for transport to prisoner of war camps. And here's what matters. American soldiers processing these prisoners treat them firmly but correctly. German soldiers, who expected summary execution or brutal revenge, instead find themselves being given food, medical attention if needed, and processed through established procedures. The contrast with what they feared is enormous. Within days, word spreads through Wehrmacht communication networks. A German general surrendered 20,000 men to American forces. Everyone was treated properly. No atrocities, no revenge. Just professional military conduct. This is exactly what Patton calculated would happen. Other German commanders across France hear the story. They start requesting surrender to American forces, specifically because Americans follow the laws of war. In the following weeks, German units surrender in increasing numbers. Small garrisons, battalion-sized forces, regiment-sized groups, all of them mentioning Elster's surrender as proof that capitulation to Americans means proper treatment, not execution. But here's where the story gets complicated, because Patton never actually met Elster personally. He wasn't present at the surrender ceremony. He didn't give any special treatment beyond what the Geneva Conventions already required. What Patton did was simply approve the terms and ensure his forces followed military law. That's it. No dramatic speeches, no personal intervention. Just a command decision that proper procedure would be followed. And that decision created a cascade effect across France that shortened the campaign and saved lives on both sides. In Part 2, we'll see what happened to General Elster after the war, how the Nazi government tried to execute him for treason, and why his decision to trust Patton's word became the template for dozens of other German surrenders. We'll explore the strategic calculations that made Patton's approach more effective than pure aggression, and we'll examine whether treating enemies with respect is weakness or the highest form of military leadership. The answer might surprise you. September 1944. General Elster just surrendered 20,000 German troops to American forces. Patton approved the terms. The Germans were treated according to military law. Word spread across France. Other isolated German units heard the story. And now they're watching, waiting to see what happens next. Because if Elster's decision leads to execution or torture, every surrounded German commander will fight to the death. But there's a problem. A massive problem. Adolf Hitler just found out what happened, and he's furious. Berlin, September 17, 1944. 24 hours after the surrender. Nazi High Command receives the intelligence report. General Botho Henning Elster capitulated without authorization. 20,000 Wehrmacht soldiers laid down their arms without firing a shot. No last stand. No final battle. No honorable death. Just surrender. Hitler's response is immediate and brutal. Elster is declared a traitor. His military rank is stripped. His family's property is confiscated. Orders go out to Wehrmacht units across Europe. Any officer who surrenders without fighting to total annihilation will be executed. Their families will be punished under Sippenhaft, the Nazi policy of clan liability. The message is clear. You die fighting, or you die as a traitor. There is no third option. But here's what makes this insane. Hitler's rage actually proves Patton was right. Because now, every German officer in France faces an impossible calculation. Surrender to Americans and risk Nazi execution if Germany somehow wins. Or fight to the death and guarantee dying for nothing if Germany loses. The smart ones do the math. Germany is losing. The Allies control France. The Red Army is advancing from the east. The war is over, except for the dying. Surrendering to Americans who follow the Geneva Conventions means survival. Fighting for Hitler means death. The choice is obvious. Except it's not obvious to everyone. Within Patton's own command structure, officers are questioning his decision. Why show respect to defeated Nazis? Why negotiate with enemies who deserve nothing but destruction? Some American commanders argue Patton is being soft, too lenient, setting a dangerous precedent. If Germans think they can surrender with honor, they won't fear American forces. They'll fight longer, hold out for better terms, use surrender negotiations as a tactical delay. One particular colonel in 3rd Army headquarters is vocal about this. Let's call him Colonel Morrison. Career officer, veteran of North Africa, lost men to German artillery. He confronts Patton directly. Sir, with respect, treating these Germans like professional soldiers sends the wrong message. They're Nazis. They've occupied France for 4 years, committed atrocities, and we're giving them 3 meals a day and Geneva Convention protection? Morrison's argument has support. Other officers nod. Some privately agree. Why reward enemies with decent treatment? Patton listens. Then he responds with the coldest military logic Morrison has ever heard. Colonel, how many American soldiers died taking that territory where Elster's 20,000 men were trapped? Morrison doesn't have the exact number. Patton continues. 0. We got 20,000 enemies off the battlefield without losing 1 American life. Now tell me which approach kills fewer of our boys. Shooting Germans until they're all dead? Or giving them a reason to quit? Morrison starts to respond, but Patton cuts him off. Every German who surrenders because he saw Elster treated properly is 1 less German shooting at your men. That's not mercy. That's mathematics. The room goes quiet, because Patton just reframed the entire discussion. This isn't about morality or justice or punishing Nazis. This is about reducing American casualties. And when you put it that way, the answer is obvious. Treat surrendering enemies according to military law, and more enemies will surrender. It's that simple. But Patton needs proof. He needs to show this isn't just theory. He needs other German units to follow Elster's example, and he needs it to happen fast, before Berlin's propaganda convinces trapped German forces that surrender equals execution. Within days, the opportunity arrives. Another isolated German unit in western France, approximately 3,000 troops, cut off near Brest. Their commander sends a message. He's willing to surrender, but he wants the same terms Elster got. Formal military capitulation. Geneva Convention treatment. No handover to French forces. This is the test. If Patton approves and the surrender goes smoothly, it proves the strategy works. If he refuses, or if something goes wrong, the precedent collapses. Every other German commander will assume Elster was a one-time exception. They'll fight to the death rather than risk betrayal. Patton doesn't hesitate. He approves the terms. orders his field commanders to handle it exactly like Elster's surrender. Professional conduct. Military protocol. No exceptions. September 19, 1944, near Brest. 3,000 German soldiers march toward American lines in formation. The scene mirrors what happened 3 days earlier with Elster. American troops accepting the surrender, processing prisoners, providing food and medical care. And once again, word spreads through Wehrmacht communication networks. Another German unit surrendered to Americans. Everyone treated properly. No massacres. No revenge killing. Just POW procedures according to international law. The effect is immediate. Within 1 week, 5 more German units in France request surrender terms. Within 2 weeks, the number doubles. Isolated garrisons, battalion-sized forces, supply units, all of them specifically asking for American forces to accept their capitulation. All of them citing Elster's example as proof that Americans follow the rules. Patton's staff starts tracking the numbers. By early October 1944, approximately 45,000 German troops have surrendered to Third Army units in circumstances similar to Elster's. 45,000 enemies removed from combat. 0 American casualties to achieve it. The strategic value is enormous. But success creates new problems. Processing 45,000 prisoners requires massive logistics. Food, water, medical supplies, transportation, guard units, administrative personnel. POW camps are filling faster than expected. Some American units are overwhelmed. They're combat soldiers, not prison administrators. Tensions rise. German prisoners complain about conditions. American guards get frustrated dealing with demands from defeated enemies. Reports reach Patton's headquarters. The system is straining. Patton responds with typical directness. He issues clear orders. Geneva Convention compliance is non-negotiable. Any American soldier who mistreats prisoners will face court-martial. Any unit that fails to follow proper POW procedures will be removed from frontline duty. The message goes out across Third Army. We follow the laws of war because following those laws wins the war faster. Period. Some officers still disagree privately, but Patton's reputation means his orders get followed, whether everyone agrees or not. Meanwhile, in Germany, the Nazi response intensifies. Propaganda Minister Goebbels broadcasts speeches denouncing Elster and other officers who surrendered. They're traitors, cowards, criminals who abandoned their duty. Newsreels show Hitler awarding medals to officers who died fighting rather than surrendering. The message is clear. Germany honors death. Germany punishes capitulation. But here's what the Nazis don't understand. Their propaganda is having the opposite effect. German soldiers in France are hearing these broadcasts, and they're learning that Berlin considers them expendable. Die for nothing or face execution. Those are the only options the regime offers. So they choose the third option: surrender to Americans who treat prisoners according to military law. By November 1944, German surrender rates across the Western Front are higher than any previous period of the war. Intelligence officers analyze the trend. They interview German POWs. The same story emerges repeatedly. Officers heard about Elster, heard about other successful surrenders, realized their tactical situation was hopeless, made the rational choice to save their men rather than waste lives for a lost cause. And every single one of them mentions that trusting American treatment made the decision possible. Patton never personally met most of these surrendering officers. He never gave speeches about mercy or humanity. He simply enforced existing military law and let the results speak for themselves. By the end of 1944, his approach becomes standard across American forces in Europe. Not because of idealism, because it works. Treating enemies according to the Geneva Conventions encourages surrender. Encouraging surrender reduces casualties. Reducing casualties wins wars faster. Cold, calculated, effective. But back in Germany, General Elster's family is paying the price for his decision. Nazi authorities confiscate their property. Elster's wife faces interrogation. His children are expelled from schools. The regime wants to make an example, show what happens to families of traitors. Except Elster is safely in American custody, beyond Hitler's reach, protected by the same military law that convinced him surrender was possible. And he's not worried about his own fate. He's worried about whether his decision will condemn other German officers who might consider following his example. Because that's the real test, coming in Part 3. As word spreads about Nazi reprisals against Elster's family, will other German commanders still choose surrender? Or will fear of regime revenge force them to fight to the death? And what happens when the war finally ends, and Elster has to face a German military court that might execute him for the very decision that saved 20,000 lives? The answer will determine whether Patton's strategy was just a temporary success or a fundamental shift in how modern warfare handles defeated enemies. And the stakes are higher than anyone realizes. November 1944. 45,000 German troops have surrendered to Patton's Third Army. They're treated according to Geneva Conventions. Word spreads across the Western Front. More units are choosing capitulation over death. Hitler is losing control of his own forces. And in Berlin, Nazi high command realizes they have a massive problem. American respect for military law is destroying German will to fight. They need to stop this, now. And their solution will trigger a crisis that tests whether Patton's strategy can survive when the enemy fights back not with bullets, but with terror. Berlin, November 3, 1944. Gestapo headquarters. Orders go out to occupied territories and Germany itself. Any family member of officers who surrendered without authorization will face immediate arrest, property confiscation, labor camps. The message is brutal and clear. Your commander's cowardice will destroy everyone you love. Nazi propaganda amplifies the threat. Radio broadcasts name officers who capitulated, describe punishments inflicted on their families. Show trials are organized. Officers captured by partisans or retreating Wehrmacht units face execution for desertion. Newsreels broadcast the executions across Germany. The psychological warfare is sophisticated. Make surrender so personally costly that even rational commanders choose death over condemning their families. Target the one thing that might override military logic: love, family, the primal human need to protect those you care about. And initially, it works. German surrender rates drop. Not to zero, but noticeably. Intelligence officers in Patton's command notice the trend. Fewer white flags. More last stands. Trapped German units choosing desperate breakout attempts instead of negotiated capitulation. Something changed. They investigate. POW interrogations reveal the truth. German officers are terrified of what Berlin will do to their families. This is the new battlefield. Not tanks versus tanks. Not infantry versus infantry, but Patton's promise of lawful treatment versus Hitler's threat of family destruction. And for the first time since Elster's surrender, the strategy faces genuine resistance. Some American officers argue this proves Patton was wrong. Germans won't surrender regardless of treatment. Might as well go back to demanding unconditional capitulation with no negotiation. Why waste time on military courtesies when the enemy fights dirty? But Patton sees it differently. The fact that Berlin is using terror tactics proves the surrender strategy is working. If it wasn't threatening Nazi control, they wouldn't bother fighting it. The solution isn't to abandon the approach. The solution is to make it more visible, more public, more undeniable. Show every German soldier that surrender to Americans means survival. Not just for them, but eventually for their families when Germany loses the war. December 1944. Western Germany, near the Siegfried Line. A German infantry battalion, approximately 800 men, is surrounded near the town of Geilenkirchen. They've been cut off for 5 days. No supplies, no ammunition reserves, no hope of relief. Their commander is Major Klaus Weber, 42 years old, professional soldier, 3 children back in Hamburg. He knows the situation is hopeless. He knows surrender is the rational choice. But he also knows what Berlin did to General Elster's family. His wife interrogated, his children expelled from schools, his property seized. Weber faces the calculation every trapped German officer now makes: fight and die here, or surrender and condemn his family to Nazi revenge. For 3 days he delays the decision. His men are starving. Wounded soldiers are dying without medical care. But Weber can't give the order to capitulate. Then something changes. An American officer approaches under white flag, not demanding surrender, not threatening bombardment, just talking. The conversation lasts 20 minutes. The American makes one argument that cuts through Weber's paralysis. Major, Germany is losing this war. Everyone knows it. In 6 months, maybe less, the war ends. When it does, Nazi authority ends. The Gestapo ends. The threats end. Your family survives, if you survive to protect them after the war. But if you die here, who protects them when Germany collapses? Weber realizes the logic is airtight. Dead officers can't protect anyone. Surviving officers can reunite with families when the regime falls. The choice isn't between his life and theirs. It's between dying uselessly now or surviving to help them later. December 12, 1944. Major Weber surrenders his battalion. 800 German soldiers lay down weapons, march toward American lines, are processed according to military law, given food, medical treatment, proper POW status. The surrender happens without incident. But this time, something different occurs. American intelligence officers interview Weber extensively, document his concerns about family reprisals, get his permission to publicize his decision and reasoning. Then they do something unprecedented. They broadcast it over German-language radio transmissions aimed at Wehrmacht units. Leaflets dropped over German positions. The message is simple. Major Klaus Weber surrendered to preserve his ability to protect his family after Germany's inevitable defeat. He and his 800 men are alive and well in American custody. When this war ends, they go home. The officers who died fighting pointless battles will never see their families again. Choose wisely. The effect is devastating to Nazi morale. Because the message isn't American propaganda, it's German officers explaining their own logic, and that logic is unassailable. Dead men can't protect families. Living POWs can. Within 2 weeks, surrender rates spike again, higher than before Berlin's terror campaign, because now trapped German officers understand the timeline. Survive the next few months as American POWs. Wait for Germany to lose. Return home when Nazi authority collapses. protect families in the chaos that follows. January 1945. The Western Front. German resistance is crumbling, not just from military pressure, but from rational calculation. Officers are doing the math. Every day Germany fights extends the war, extends the bombing, extends the killing, extends the suffering. Surrendering to Americans shortens everything. Units that might have fought for weeks instead capitulate in days. The cumulative effect is measured in thousands of lives. Allied intelligence estimates that Patton's approach to POW treatment, combined with the systematic communication of that treatment to trapped German forces, reduced the Western Front campaign by approximately 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks. That's how much time treating enemies according to military law saved. Time measured in American casualties that never happened. German soldiers who went home instead of dying. French civilians who didn't get caught in final battles. The strategic value isn't theoretical. It's documented. Surrender logs show the trend. POW interviews confirm the motivation. After-action reports note the reduced resistance. The numbers are undeniable. But there's something else happening. Something that won't be fully understood until after the war. German officers who surrendered to Americans and were treated properly become advocates for lawful warfare. When they return to Germany after 1945, they carry that experience. They rebuild the German military with different values. The post-war Bundeswehr, the new German armed forces, explicitly reject Nazi military culture and embrace Geneva Convention compliance, partly because officers like Weber and Elster experienced both systems and knew which one preserved human dignity. That's the ultimate victory of Patton's approach. Not just winning the immediate war faster, but changing how the defeated enemy thinks about warfare itself. Creating conditions where future German military culture embraces the laws of war that protected them when they were POWs. The strategic ripple effects extend decades beyond 1945. February 1945. The war in Europe is entering its final phase. Soviet forces are approaching Berlin from the east. American and British forces are crossing the Rhine from the west. Germany's defeat is inevitable. Measured in weeks, not months. And across Wehrmacht units, the calculation becomes even simpler. Why die in the last days of a lost war? Surrender rates reach unprecedented levels. Entire divisions capitulate with minimal resistance. Some units don't even wait to be surrounded. They withdraw from defensive positions specifically to surrender to American forces before Soviet forces arrive. The preference for American captivity over Soviet captivity is overwhelming. German soldiers know the Soviets have reasons for revenge. 4 years of brutal warfare on the Eastern Front. Millions of Soviet civilians dead. German atrocities in occupied Soviet territory. Soviet treatment of German POWs is harsh, sometimes brutal, often fatal. American treatment follows Geneva Conventions. The choice is survival versus probable death. Germans choose Americans overwhelmingly. Patton's forces process tens of thousands of POWs in the final months of the war. The logistics are massive, but the system works because it was designed to handle exactly this scenario. Treat enemies properly, and they surrender in large numbers. Plan for large-scale surrenders, and you can handle them efficiently. The strategy and logistics reinforce each other. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe ends. And now comes the reckoning. General Botho Henning Elster has been in American custody for 8 months. He's been a model prisoner, cooperative, professional. Exactly what you'd expect from a career officer who made a rational military decision. But now he faces a different kind of trial. The new German government, transitioning from Nazi rule to Allied occupation, must decide what to do with officers who surrendered during the war. Some Germans view them as traitors, men who abandoned their posts, dishonored the military, cost Germany the war. Others view them as heroes, men who saved lives, made rational decisions, ended pointless bloodshed. The debate is fierce, emotional, politically charged. And Elster, as the highest-ranking officer who surrendered a major force without authorization, becomes the test case. His fate will determine how post-war Germany judges all the other officers who followed his example. The trial is set for late 1945. Elster will face charges of desertion and dereliction of duty under German military law. The prosecution will argue he betrayed his oath and his country. The defense will argue he made the only rational decision available and saved 20,000 lives. The verdict will echo across post-war Europe. But there's one more twist to the story. One final revelation about Patton's role that changes how we understand everything that happened. And that's what we'll discover in Part 4. September 1944. General Elster surrendered 20,000 German troops. Patton approved Geneva Convention treatment. Word spread. 45,000 more Germans surrendered within weeks. The strategy worked. Shortened the war. Saved thousands of lives. But now comes the question nobody asks in history books. What happened to the men who made these decisions? What price did they pay for choosing reason over fanaticism? Because victory in war doesn't always mean victory in peace. And sometimes the men who save the most lives get punished for it. May 1945. Germany surrenders. The war ends. General Botho Henning Elster is still in American custody. For 8 months, he's been a model prisoner. Cooperative, professional. Exactly what career officers are supposed to be. He's interviewed extensively by American intelligence, provides information about Wehrmacht organization, explains German defensive strategies, helps translate documents, makes himself useful. Because he understands something crucial. The war is over, but his trial is just beginning. The new German government, transitioning from Nazi control to Allied occupation, must decide what to do with officers who surrendered during the war. And Elster is the highest-profile case. The man who capitulated with 20,000 troops without firing a shot. Some Germans view him as a traitor, others as a hero. The debate is fierce. Late 1945. Elster stands trial in a German military court. The charge is desertion and dereliction of duty under military law. The prosecution argues he betrayed his oath, abandoned his command, dishonored the Wehrmacht, set a precedent that encouraged mass surrenders and helped Germany lose the war. The prosecution's case is straightforward. Elster commanded 20,000 troops. He had ammunition. He had defensive positions. He could have fought. Delayed American advances, inflicted casualties, made the enemy pay for every kilometer. Instead, he negotiated surrender terms like Germany had bargaining power, treated defeat as something honorable instead of shameful. And 45,000 more German soldiers followed his example within weeks. If officers like Elster had fought to the last man, perhaps Germany could have negotiated better peace terms. Perhaps the outcome would have been different. Elster's defense is simpler. He saved 20,000 lives. His tactical situation in September 1944 was hopeless. completely surrounded. No supplies, no support, no chance of victory or escape. Fighting would have accomplished nothing except killing Germans and Americans for zero strategic gain. Surrendering preserved his men's lives and allowed them to return home after the war ended. The choice was between pointless death and rational survival. He chose survival. Any professional officer would have done the same. The trial lasts 3 days. Testimony from German officers who served under Elster. Evidence about the tactical situation in September 1944. Expert analysis of military options available. And finally, the verdict. Not guilty. The court recognizes that Elster's situation was genuinely hopeless. His decision was militarily sound. His conduct was professional. And most importantly, his surrender saved lives without betraying any strategic objective because there was no strategic objective to defend. The ruling is significant. It establishes that German officers who surrendered in hopeless situations acted honorably, not treasonously. Hundreds of other officers facing similar charges are cleared based on this precedent. Elster is freed, returns to civilian life in Germany, lives quietly, avoids publicity. When journalists ask about September 1944, he gives brief answers. Yes, he surrendered. Yes, it was the right decision. Yes, American forces treated him and his men according to international law. And that last point is what he always emphasizes. The fact that Americans followed the Geneva Conventions made surrender possible. If he believed capitulation meant execution or torture, he might have felt obligated to fight on. Not because he expected victory, but because military honor would have demanded it. The professional treatment gave him the ability to make the rational choice. Elster dies in 1952. 7 years after the war ended. He never sought fame, never wrote memoirs, never gave extensive interviews. He was a professional soldier who made one consequential decision and then returned to private life. But his legacy extends far beyond his personal story, because what happened with Elster changed how Germany thinks about military conduct. The post-war Bundeswehr, the new German armed forces established in 1955, explicitly embraces Geneva Convention compliance. Officers are taught that respecting the laws of war isn't weakness, it's professional obligation. And that cultural shift comes partly from officers like Elster, who experienced both systems, who saw firsthand that armies can be effective and lawful, that following international law doesn't compromise military capability. The strategic impact is measurable. Military historians estimate that surrender policies similar to Patton's approach reduced the Western Front campaign by 6 to 8 weeks. That's 6 to 8 weeks of bombing, artillery, infantry combat, urban warfare removed from the timeline. Translate that into lives. American casualties that never happened. German soldiers who went home instead of dying. French and Belgian and Dutch civilians who didn't get caught in final battles. The number runs into thousands, maybe tens of thousands, all because Patton understood that how you treat defeated enemies influences whether other enemies choose defeat. Modern military doctrine has codified this insight. Counterinsurgency field manuals emphasize that respecting laws of armed conflict encourages enemy surrender. POW treatment standards are strategic tools, not just humanitarian obligations. Professional armies use lawful conduct as a force multiplier. Make rational enemies understand that capitulation means survival, and they'll choose capitulation when their situation becomes hopeless. This is standard training now. But in 1944, Patton was operating on intuition and strategic sophistication that was decades ahead of formal doctrine. The lesson extends beyond warfare. In any competitive environment, how you treat defeated competitors shapes future competition. Corporations that destroy defeated rivals, create industries where everyone fights to the death. Corporations that allow honorable exits create industries where failing companies shut down gracefully, instead of burning resources in futile last stands. Political systems that punish defeated parties create winner-take-all extremism. Systems that allow graceful transitions create stable democracies. The principle is universal. Give rational actors an acceptable alternative to fighting to the end, and many will take it. But here's what makes Patton's decision even more remarkable. He never personally benefited from it. Never met Elster face to face. Never attended surrender ceremonies. Never gave speeches about mercy or humanity. He simply issued orders that existing military law would be followed. That's it. No drama. No grand gestures. Just professional command decisions that proper procedure would be enforced. And that created a cascade effect across the Western Front that shortened the war and saved lives. There's one more detail most people don't know. After the war, American military researchers studied surrender patterns across different theaters. They compared Western Front surrender rates under commanders who followed Geneva Conventions strictly versus commanders who were more flexible about POW treatment. The data was overwhelming. Units under commanders with reputations for lawful POW treatment received significantly more enemy surrenders. The correlation was so strong that it became a factor in theater command assignments. If you're fighting an enemy that might surrender, put a commander in charge who has a reputation for following the rules. The enemy will hear about it, and surrender rates will increase. Patton died in December 1945. Car accident in Germany. 7 months after the war ended. He never knew the full extent of how his POW policies affected post-war military doctrine. Never saw the Bundeswehr embrace Geneva Convention compliance. Never learned that his approach would become standard counterinsurgency training decades later. He just made a pragmatic decision that enemy soldiers who surrender properly should be treated properly. And that decision rippled forward through military history in ways he never imagined. From a surrounded German general facing impossible choices, to a strategic calculation that saved tens of thousands of lives. From a single surrender in September 1944, to a fundamental shift in how professional armies think about defeated enemies. Elster proved that rational military decisions can override political fanaticism when the alternative is survival. Patton proved that respecting the laws of war isn't mercy, it's strategic sophistication. And together, they demonstrated that sometimes the most effective way to defeat an enemy is to give them a reason to stop fighting. That's not weakness. That's understanding warfare at the highest level, where the goal isn't just winning battles, it's ending wars with minimum cost in blood and time. And that lesson remains as relevant today as it was 80 years ago, when 20,000 German soldiers chose survival over pointless death. And one American general understood why that choice should be honored.